So without further ado, let us begin. So welcome to this webinar titled How to Learn Like a Pro, held by National Library Board. And I'm Melvin, and I'm very glad to be with you this wonderful day to learn together with you. So the future of work is changing. Industries are consolidating, new business models are emerging, and new technologies are being developed. And to survive and thrive in this new era, we must constantly learn. And today we are very pleased to take a deep dive into the brain with Dr. Barbara Oakley, as she offers a neuroscience-backed advice on tackling daunting subjects across disciplines and tips on beating procrastination. In this session, that promises to be equal parts insightful, practical, and humorous. Dr. Barbara Oakley is an accomplished American author, distinguished professor of engineering at Oakland University. Her work focuses on the complex relationships between neuroscience and social behavior, and she has also published in outlets as varied as National Academy of Sciences, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. Her book, A Mind for Numbers, is a New York Times and international bestseller, translated in over a dozen languages. So just to repeat, ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions, please use the Q&A box down below, because we are excited to have questions and we're excited to have that interaction with you. And remember to vote for the questions that you like, because they have a higher likelihood of being answered by our speaker. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let us invite Dr. Barbara Oakley to deliver her presentation. Dr. Barbara, please.
Well, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure being here. And so I'm going to talk about learning like a pro, but I'm going to sneak in a little information for you about teaching like a pro as well. So let's go ahead and share my screen. And we're in good shape here. So hopefully everyone can see my screen now. And let's learn how to learn like a pro. If you look, the brain is, as we know, very complicated. And the challenge is, how do we understand how it works in a simple way to help us understand how to learn better? If we look at one of the brain's fundamental building blocks, which is the neuron, it can help us to understand more quickly how to grasp new information. So the neuron's very simple. It's just a cell. It's got like an arm at the top, an axon, legs at the bottom, dendrites. These dendritic spines are at the heart of learning. They form and fix when you're remembering things. They dissolve away when you forget things. So let's look at what the neuron's really doing in the brain. It's really sending signals. So if you look here, these cells, the neurons, are connecting together, a group of them, when you learn something. So it's these electrical signals that connect together a little group of neurons that create our memories. These memories must, if you are learning something, it has to remain in long-term memory. And if it isn't there, you haven't actually learned the material. So people who might say to you things like, oh, you can always go look it up. Do not listen to them. Yes, if it's trivial, you can look it up. But if you rely on just looking things up, you do not have that expertise. Would you know French, for example, if you always had to use Google Translate? No, you have not built those neural structures. So building neural structures is the heart of learning. And how do you build those neural structures? Well, oftentimes listening to explanations like what I'm giving you here is a good start. But then practicing on your own is what helps you to strengthen those links between the neurons. Ultimately, what you really want is that you practice and you create these thick, rich sets of links in long-term memory that allow you to remember things and work with them. So you truly develop expertise through lots of practice. Just incidentally, those neurons are, if you look here, they're stored in, there's our little set of links there. And they're way tiny. Of course, they're right there in the neocortex. What is the neocortex? It's this incredible large handkerchief-like. It's like 2/3 square of a meter, or like a typical dinner napkin size thin sheet that resides over the surface of your brain. So that is your neocortex, and that is the heart of many of the memories that you form when you're learning new things. So this brings me to a very, very important question, and that is, when you're learning something, what is, or if you're teaching something, what is the most effective way to learn something most efficiently? Is it to, for example, I'm going to give you 4 options. Is it rereading? Because if you reread, you're like repeating that information. Or is it perhaps underlining or highlighting? Do you do this? I do this sometimes. It helps my eye go and find where that important piece of information was on the page. But could it be retrieval practice or recall, where like you're using flashcards or something of that nature? Or could it be creating a concept map? So a concept map is, well, basically what you're doing is you're connecting together. You write down a map that connects together key ideas. So John, how, if you might launch the poll here, let's see which of these 4 options you believe is the best for helping people to learn. Dun, 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 dun. Okay. Oh, it says here I can't vote. That's no fair. Well, I do know the answer, so. Okay. So the results are rolling in. Let's see what everyone feels is the best. Let's see if I've been able to fool you about which of these answers is the best answer. Okay. Okay, whenever you feel it's ready, we can go ahead and share that poll and its results. There we go. Okay, so we can look at these results together here. And you can see that by far, the majority of you feel that concept mapping is the best way to go. Retrieval practice gets a respectable share, highlighting and rereading. People kind of have a sense that that's wrong. So which between the 2 of these is correct? Let's see. It is retrieval practice. And why is that? When I am first teaching you, informing you, or you're reading a book and you're getting that information into your brain, what's happening is that you have this kind of initial learning that is taking place. So in some sense, what's happening is you're creating this very, very weak set of links in your long-term memory. But how can you strengthen those links? As it turns out, it's by retrieving them. So your best way of learning something is not to reread it or not to create concept maps. Those are extraneous to what's going on in your brain. The only way to, for sure, be strengthening those sets of links is to be retrieving them from your own brain. So, for example, this means using flashcards, but also doing things like teaching others, because what is teaching others? It's retrieving information from your own brain. Let's say that you walk out of a classroom what is the best way to grasp or to make sure that you really learn and retain what you've learned? Sit down right afterwards, even if you've taken careful notes, and just jot down, what did you think were the most important things you learned? You might think that this kind of thing is just basically memorizing. Far from that, because what you're doing is as you retrieve a concept, it's actually helping you understand what is that concept not. And in fact, research that's been done on this has shown that people who use retrieval practice have a far better, not only memory of the information weeks later, they have a better understanding of the information weeks later. So retrieval practice is at the heart of great learning. And people only figured this out because, well, concept mapping, that whole idea came out. Oh, yes, it's a great idea. You know, it was kind of a fad in education. So people who are really pretty well informed about education believe that concept mapping is the best approach because they've been told that for decades. But research has shown, when carefully and contrasting all of those approaches that I had mentioned, that retrieval practice is by far the best. And it's just that nobody ever thought before to sit down and actually do a comparative study of all these different techniques. So this is very important for learning. Now, what happens though, let's say, so I had a student once, and he said, he came up, he had flunked a test. He came up and he showed me the results, and it was all redlined all over. And he's like, I just don't understand this, how I could have flunked this test, because I understood it when you said it in class. And people can kind of grasp what's going on, but it's that very, very faint set of links, right? That make it so that you're simply, you've kind of got a weak understanding, but not a true understanding. And then what happens is this. So you're sitting there, you try to recall those concepts you learned weeks ago. If you don't practice with them in the meantime, those little dendritic links, those spines, they will be swept away by your synaptic janitors. And that indeed is why retrieval practice consistently, spaced repetition over time, is so important. Because if you're not using and practicing with those ideas, especially when you first learn them, very weak links, very easy to lose them. And we can see, though, that there's another aspect that's very important in learning, and that is sleep. So you are budding neuroscientists now. This is a dendrite, right? That leg of the neuron, and it's got those little toes, the dendritic spines on it. And this is an image of a living neuron before learning and before sleep. This is the same living neuron after learning and after sleep. And you can see here, like wherever there's a little blue triangle, look, there's a new dendritic spine that's emerged there that was not there before. Or if there was a dendritic spine, it's strengthened. And this happened because during the sleep process, your brain practices over and over again with the ideas you've been learning during the day. And so it's this sleep process that actually really builds and strengthens and helps the brain consolidate. That is kind of, really strengthen and compact into a very, usable configuration, the information you're learning. So not getting enough sleep can hamper your ability to grasp the information you've learned during the day. So let's say you learn during the day, and then you get 2 hours of sleep because you've been cramming, and then you go take a test the next day. What you're doing is you have not given your brain the time to grow these dendritic spines and strengthen them, and it's really hard to do well on the test. In fact, that whole cramming period may be for nothing, because if you don't get enough sleep, you simply cannot grow those neural connections and create the neural architecture. So you can go for a little while with some sleep deprivation, but be very wary about long periods, unless you're lucky enough to be one of the few who has what's called the short sleep gene, which is like you can sleep nicely 4 to 5 hours a night and, and do quite nicely. But most of us don't have that gene. I wish I had that gene. So this is why it's so important to do spaced repetition, to space out your learning day by day, because what you're doing is you're learning something. You've got a weak set of links to start with. You sleep at night, strengthens. Then you try it again the next day. Sleep at night, strengthens even more. And so each day, as you're using this spaced repetition, you are actually creating a really nice, strong foundation for learning. If instead you do all your cramming in one day, so you have 5 hours, you do 5 hours of studies in one day, it's easier for your little synaptic janitor to sweep those links away, as opposed to is if you had 5 hours to study, but you spaced it out 1 hour per day in over a number of days. So if you would like another metaphor, and metaphors are powerful learning techniques, you can think of it as building a brick wall. So you lay a layer of bricks, mortar, and you let those, let that wall kind of gradually build. And while it takes time to do that, if you just build the wall and don't let the mortar dry in between, you get this really, really lousy foundation for learning. In some sense, I love metaphors. You can think of it. So all of this involves spaced repetition, of course, but it takes time to learn well. And there's something that's a little bit, impishly, it's called the meathead theory of learning. And there's actually quite a bit of truth to this analogy. We say it takes time to build muscular structure. I mean, this weightlifter did not sit there and go, gosh, I've got a big championship meet the next day. I'm just going to lift a bunch of weights. It took him time to build muscular structure. And similarly, it takes time to build neural structure. Both neural and muscular structure are excitable tissues. So it's quite reasonable to come up with an analogy between them. But we can see for the weightlifter that he simply can't do that overnight. But we can't see inside our brains. So we sometimes think, oh, we can just cram and that will do the job, but it really won't. So I'm going to turn now to one of my favorite athletes of all time. And his name is Julius Ego. Julius is from Kenya, and he, if you know anything about Kenya, you know that it's quite famous for its long distance runners. Look at Julius's arms. They do not look like a long distance runner's arms. Indeed, he always wanted to become a weightlifter. And so what he did was he couldn't afford to go and train in another country, and there were no coaches of the, he always wanted to become a thrower of the javelin. So he how could he learn to throw the javelin, since there were no javelin throwing coaches in all of Kenya? And also he just wasn't from a wealthy family or anything, so he couldn't afford to go overseas for training. So what he did was he started watching YouTube videos from top trainers. And then what he would do is he'd watch a video, he'd go out and train, watch and train, watch and train. Do you know that 98% just by doing this, he ended up winning the world championship in throwing the javelin? So this tells us a lot of things. For one thing, you can learn things online that you could never think you would be able to learn. And it's so funny because sometimes if you ask people, you'll be like, could you ever become a world champion or really good at a sport by just watching it online? And they'll be like, you can't teach sports online. And then if they hear the Julius Yego story, what they'll then say is, yeah, that's just a sport. You can't learn anything mental online. So it's so strange how we are biased unwittingly against online learning when actually online, it's actually easier to learn mental sports online. So I think Julius gives us an idea of the power of online learning, but he also gives us an understanding of a very important part of good learning. And this relates to how to teach in a way that people can learn more efficiently. So we've known forever that if you lecture, for example, what I'm doing now is I'm lecturing to you. I'm giving you explicit information. You're learning something. But if I go on too long, except Singaporeans are really, really smart. So I can go on kind of longer than I can for other countries. But for normal people, if you lecture too long, it can really overload people and they lose things. And it's harder for them to learn if you have like a 2-hour lecture. So lecture kind of fell out of fashion as, it's really hard on students and it doesn't stick, which is true. So then a lot of education sort of started moving towards this idea of active learning is super important. And by active learning, I mean having students themselves actually practice with the material. But that actually isn't all the answer. I mean, like Julius, think about it. He went out and he practiced with the javelin, but he also had a coach. He was watching his coaches online. He had that initial explicit instruction, putting those weak set of links that he would go out and reinforce. So actually what he was doing was, maybe something like this. He'd listen to lecture. Well, actually, it was probably more like this. Listen to, watch the video, go out and practice, watch, practice, and so forth. In fact, there's lots of variations of this kind of thing. This approach to teaching is called direct instruction, and it has been shown by research to be probably the most effective way of teaching that there is. And it's so funny. Great teachers know, well, yeah, I've got to explain something, and then I got to have my students do it. And it's such a natural and good technique that sometimes it's it can be a little bit disconcerting to see educational experts really saying it's all got to be active learning, because you got to lay those initial sets of links. And this is where teachers really come to shine, because remember, Julius was looking at those world famous coaches of the javelin. He would watch the screen, and really try to figure out what they were doing, looking at it, listening to it. And then he would go out and he would practice on his own. So what he was really doing was that mixture of lecture with active learning, lecture with active learning. And this back and forth was a powerhouse to help him improve his learning. So if we look at this, what does this really mean as far as the brain goes? It's a little like this. I had talked about we have to deposit sets of links in long-term memory if we're actually learning something. So, but I didn't tell you how those sets of links were deposited. In fact, there's two ways that you can deposit sets of links in long-term memory. So what you can do is, like, your working memory is, you can almost think of it as like this little octopus that's in your prefrontal cortex, that's the front of your brain. And that is what holds on to information, and briefly, so that you can kind of put it more into long-term memory. So like I tell you, you read about a fact from history, gets into your working memory, and then that fact feeds through the hippocampus to create links in long-term memory. This form of learning is called declarative learning. And it's like what I'm doing here right now. I'm explaining things to you step by step, and it's pretty easy to follow the logic of what I'm teaching. Now, there's another way of learning, however, and that is through the procedural system. And this procedural system it goes through a structure called the basal ganglia. And this basal ganglia is like a learning structure that's quite different from the hippocampus. And here's the difference. So there was a patient called Henry Mollison. He was known as HM in a lot of the literature, who had both of his hippocampi removed by an overzealous neurosurgeon in an effort to kind of try to control his epilepsy. Well, he emerged and the epilepsy was significantly reduced, but it turns out that he could not remember you. So if he was presented with any new information, he couldn't learn it or he couldn't remember it. But stuff he knew from before, he could learn and remember. So if you look here, this hippocampal structure, if it's gone, he couldn't like move anything through it to form these links in long-term memory. So he couldn't remember anymore. If you walked in, introduced yourself, walked out of the room, and then came back in again, he'd say, "Oh, hi," and you'd have to reintroduce yourself. But not all of his learning abilities had disappeared. Let's say that you were a little bit nefarious and you put a pin in your hand. And then you walked in to Henry Mollison, and this has actually happened with other patients. I feel a little sorry for them, but put a pin in your hand, walked in and introduced yourself to Henry Mollison and shook his hand, would be like, oh, it would really be a pain. Now, you walk back out of the room and, you go home and so forth. You walk in the next day, as expected, Henry would not know who you were. But if you reached out to shake his hand, he would not take it. It's because his procedural system had learned that shaking your hand is not a good thing to do. This procedural system learns in a completely different way than the hippocampal system. And we are completely unconscious of how it learns. So it's quite interesting because what happens is we learn a lot. We learn patterns. We learn to speak our native language through this procedural system. We learn complicated mathematical expressions or concepts through the procedural system. This system you can't explain very well, but you can learn really well. And so this basal ganglia system actually can inform our conscious thinking, but we're not conscious of it. So we can think we're thinking objectively, but actually we're not, because we're being biased by that subconscious influence of the basal ganglia system. So this is why it's so important. Like, let's say it comes to so many different issues. Like, let's say you're trying to be a good manager. If your basal ganglia input system gets a whole bunch of information from all the people who are working for you, everything's great. You know, they don't want to make you unhappy. You are being fed with the idea that everything you do is really good, or, you know, what's going on, that the ship is sailing beautifully along. And that subconsciously biases your declarative system, your conscious critical thinking. And you think it's not. You're just thinking, you know, everything's fine. When actually it's simply that the data that your basal ganglia system has gathered subconsciously biases you to believe that everything's fine, when in actuality, it may not be fine at all. When we're learning and we're becoming experts at anything, we need both declarative and procedural systems. Both of those systems allow us to move forward in our learning in effective ways. So if we look at those two, what are the differences between how we the characteristics of those two systems? You kind of get a sense. You're conscious of your declarative learning. You're conscious of me talking with you. Procedural, you're not conscious of it. It's kind of like that pin, you know, he wasn't declaratively remembering it, but he could sort of intuit, oh, that guy is not someone you want to shake a hand with. You explicitly explain with declarative type learning, but with procedural learning, that arises through practice. So you're learning math through lots and lots of practice, develops that complicated pattern detection system that is the procedural system. Declarative, you can explain, whereas procedural learning is kind of like, can you explain how to tie your shoes? Well, it's actually very difficult to do that. You can kind of, but I mean, if somebody was just listening to your voice and trying to do it, you know, without being able to see you do it, it's really hard to do. And a lot of procedural learning, you may intuit why you think that this one employee is going to be a really good employee, but you can't explain why. And it's simply because you've been around, you've picked up patterns about people. And so you have a sense of what that person's capabilities are. Declarative involves sequential learning, whereas procedural is more like complicated patterns. As I discussed, it's simple things, rote learning, multiplication tables, but also figuring out, like if I said 2 times 6 is 13, your procedural system goes, no, that just can't be true. And it's because you know the pattern of anything times 2 has to result in an even number. So it's really, you can learn declaratively fairly quickly, but actually using it is a little harder and longer to do. Whereas like it's slow to learn. You have to do a lot of practice to learn with the procedural system. But once you get it, like you're learning how to type, it's very fast to use. Declarative is flexible. Whereas the keyboard is, whereas procedural learning is very inflexible. So if somebody went and changed that keyboard on me, it would take me a long time to reconfigure my brain and be able to type as fast as I was able to do previously. So how do you learn with these two different systems? For declarative learning, but for both types of learning, retrieval practice is going to help. And also spaced repetition. Now, so explanation is best. I mean, that's the best way to learn declaratively. But varied practice and interleaving with information really helps the procedural system. The procedural system is very good at detecting complicated patterns. So if you give it enough data, it's almost like a machine learning system. It can allow you to start detecting the patterns. If you're teaching, say, negative binomial theorem, with binomial theorem, with geometric theorem, you're teaching all these distributions. We tend to say, oh, we gave a bunch of negative binomial problems. Now they know that really well, but they don't know the difference between how to select those different kinds. So if you are learning something, your textbooks will often give you clumps of problems about one concept. What you want to do is go look at the different chapters. If you're on chapter 7, mix in problems from some of the previous chapters, because you can interleave them and in that way begin to pick out which tool you actually need to solve that type of problem. If you simply solve the same type of problem over and over again, you will know how to solve that problem, but you won't know that you're supposed to use geometric distribution as opposed to binomial, because you haven't really focused on the differences between them. So good teachers find the challenge is that learning this way is a little harder. So students often tend to shy away from it, but good teachers encourage interleaved types of learning, and good students give themselves practice using that procedural or using that interleaved approach. Different people can have different things that they different approaches that they really prefer. So for example, those that have some people prefer more declarative learning. There's evidence that those with dyslexia may prefer declarative because their procedural systems may not work as well, whereas those with autism may prefer more procedural because their declarative systems aren't learning quite as well. So if we put a student in a box who's maybe on the autistic spectrum, and they learn better procedurally, but we force them to learn declaratively, it actually does them a disservice, because their way of learning is very powerful. And declarative, just because a student can recite the words that explain a concept, does not mean they understand the concept and can actually work with and do it. So don't be fooled by by the differences between these two systems and how they relate to true learning. I should add in one thing is, for decades, educators have said, drill is kill. It's a really bad thing. It makes students less creative. No, actually, drill can lead to skill. So it can be a very, very powerful tool. So as I'm wrapping up here, I just want to cover something that I think is super, super important. And that relates to something everybody struggles with, or virtually everybody all around the world. And that is procrastination. And procrastination happens for a very good reason. If we think about something we don't like or don't want to do, it activates a part of the brain that experiences pain, the insular cortex. And what that can do is it can, it makes us feel pain. So we just switch our thoughts to something else and we feel better instantly. And that's how we end up procrastinating. To tackle this, use the Pomodoro technique. Very simple. All you do, turn off all distractions, set a timer for 25 minutes, focus as intently as you can for 25 minutes, and then rest and reward yourself for like 5 minutes. This is extremely powerful when it comes not only to learning, but also to productivity, because that 5-minute break helps the hippocampus to offload information you have just learned, or to think about and reflect on what you've just learned. And so this indeed is a very important and powerful way to allow your brain to learn. Do not do 4-hour study sessions where you are just going straight for 4 hours. take those little breaks because they actually help your brain learn better. That hippocampus that's getting the information can only sort of offload and help the neocortex learn the information if it's not getting fresh input. And those little 5-minute breaks are really helpful that way. Also, of course, working without distraction is one of the best ways to focus. Just a very quick, why is learning via video so valuable? I just want to say there's 2 different ways that the brain learns. So it's top down, like I am using willpower to force my attention onto a screen. Or like the screen has something like surprising popping up that I don't need to use willpower when it's a surprising motion or something like that. It's natural bottom-up attentional mechanisms. So clever videos and good teaching materials make good use of things like, for example, looming motion. Now watch the screen very carefully. Look at how this person pops forward. From an evolutionary perspective, things that loomed suddenly closer to you could kill you. So although it doesn't make students nervous to see something popping forward, it naturally activates bottom-up attentional mechanism. It doesn't mean they have to use willpower. It's like it naturally happens, and it can rivet people much more easily to the screen. There is so much that you can do to engage your students. We often say, well, you know, students in online courses, they look at the videos, but what we really want them to do is engage. So we have discussion forums and, you know, peer evaluations and so forth. But look at those 2 sentences. Students in online courses look first at the videos. If we want them to look at the videos, or I mean, if they want to look at the videos, if we want them to engage, the first thing we should do is make engaging videos. So making use of some of these little neural tricks where, you know, students have their attention really, you know, brought to the screen is very important. Now, I'm not quite sure how it is in Singapore. I know that in many places around the world, people are teaching online, but they're very hesitant about making videos. Making videos is so easy. Or, you know, but the thing, no, it's not easy the first time you do it. And then after you do it the first time, it's super easy. But the most important thing you can do to make some quality online materials for your students is just make a video, make any video, because then you are beginning to engage with them in a way that is the way they want to be engaged with. So, you know, your first rule or 0th rule is make a bad video. Just set out to make a bad video. I prefer, I have no payment from Camtasia, but I like Camtasia. If you use some of the free editing programs, they will make it so that it's, you know, just, it takes you a lot of time to learn it, and then, or you can learn it, but then you have to pay to get something that actually is workable. If you just get something like Camtasia, it'll work right off the bat. They have 5-minute tutorial videos. This is what you do. 3 days, give yourself half an hour each day for 3 days, taking those tutorial videos and practicing with it, you'll be an expert. I can show you, so I can't help but show you a little bit of the kind of thing that you can do with videos. So this is my my course that just came out, Uncommon Sense Teaching. And this will give you a sense of the kind of magic that can use those bottom-up levels of, you know, of attention to keep people's attention with what you're learning. So here we go. So a teacher, a neuroscientist, and an engineer walk into a bar.
Very funny, Barb, but some people might say a teacher, a neuroscientist, and an engineer teaming up to create a practical course on teaching from a neuroscientific perspective is funny too.
But the reality is, the world is becoming more and more complex. Students need to think out of the box with approaches that incorporate the best of what we know, not only from education, but from many other disciplines.
Want to learn how to teach inclusively in diverse classrooms and how to scaffold your instruction? We will peer inside students' brains to help you minimize student frustration. All this growing not only from neuroscientific insights, but from years of practical experience in the classroom.
And we'll also teach about how to tackle procrastination. Wait, Beth. Wait, Beth.
That's right,
Beth,
it's time to
Beth,
film.
where are you?
Join us for a course on teaching like nothing you've ever seen before.
I assure you that we were not in a bar when we were filming that. It's just amazing what you can do inexpensively, like for nothing, if you just learn a little bit about videos and video editing. So I'm
Sorry,
going to
Barbara. Just wanted to remind about the timing. Yeah.
Yep. And guess
Thank you.
what? We are on the final slide right now. So so I just want to, in fact, here is my timer. And okay, so why is my timer not turning off when I tell it to turn off? That was my little timer to say I was finished. So I just want to allude to Julius Yiegel. You may say, well, you didn't have us do active learning in this. So think of this experience together as your way of watching and learning from video. And now it is for you to move forward and practice. So with that, I thank you so very much. Okay, there we go. Let's see.
Yeah, so Barbara, we have a lot of questions. I just wanted to remind everyone to vote for the questions that you would like Barbara to answer, because we probably have to answer the ones that have been voted to the top, because as you can see, we have about 50 questions, Barbara. So yeah,
Wow.
if our attendees can help to vote, they'll,
Oh my goodness.
we'll be able to sort through this very good problem that we're having. So yeah, Barbara, over to you for the questions.
Oh my goodness. Oh, this is, so are the ones at the top?
Yes, on
okay.
Vincent Chong's question. Thank you, Vincent. So Vincent, question has 74
upvoted.
votes. Yeah, so we can it's ordered for you from the most number of votes. Yeah.
Okay, so are there good and bad retrieval practices? I suppose there are. I have never been asked what a bad retrieval practice is. And so, you know, it's kind of funny. It's like nothing floats immediately to mind. But, you know, just the worst thing is thinking you're doing retrieval practice, but your eyes are still on the page. So you're looking at something and you're thinking, okay, what's the key idea here? And you're actually looking on the page. That's not really retrieval practice. So I think if you're thinking it's retrieval practice, which you can easily fool yourself into thinking it is, because it's right there and you think it's right there in your mind, it's only in your working memory, not in your long-term memory. So I guess I would say the worst form is thinking you're doing retrieval practice when you actually aren't. So there's probably other tricky ways you could fool yourself, but there's really good papers on how easy it is for students to fool themselves. So how is retrieval practice different from blind memorizing? Okay, I'll be honest with you. Some of the originators, I mean, part of it is really memorizing, but memorizing has such a bad rap in some educators, you know, perspectives, and rightly so. I mean, for hundreds of years, people thought the only way you learned was by memorizing. So, it was like, oh, they only, you just had to memorize something and then you've learned it. And so that really isn't true. But so then it got into this, well, now it's conceptual understanding. And so, so everything got into conceptual understanding, and memorizing was seen as terrible. So they came up with kind of a new term that is, it's memorizing, but it's not memorizing just in the sense, in the bad sense of memorizing, which means that you're memorizing like an equation, but you don't know what that equation means. It's like memorizing words from a foreign language, but not knowing what they mean. It's kind of rote stuff. Retrieval practice has a bigger implication to it, that you're understanding while you're memorizing. It's not just blind. So is an optimum gap between practice. Okay, so, there's various research on mice. They have recently shown that a 1 hour spacing between learning episodes in a maze works really well. For humans, I think you need to practice enough the first time you're trying to learn something that you kind of get a little bit of a sense to it. And sometimes you've got to do that over several days. But it depends so much on what you're learning. Are you learning a sport? Are you learning a mental skill? The key idea is trying to do daily bits of practice. And there are, virtuosos at the violin who say, I think it's at Perlman who said, if I miss 1 day of practice, I can tell. If I miss 2 days of practice, my fellow peers can tell. And if I miss 3 days of practice, the world can tell. So practice, continued practice day by day on something that you really want to develop a skill at is really quite important. You can't practice a new word that you're learning in a foreign language every day, for the rest of your life. So the key idea there is, and this is useful advice from experts, is right before you forget it, try to retrieve it. Who knows when you're about to forget it. So, the rule of thumb is, the longer you want to remember it, the more you kind of want to retrieve, but just gently space out your retrieval. And if you have a sense of when you think you might be forgetting it, try to retrieve at that time. Learning is one thing, but understanding is another thing. How can we improve understanding just like with a difficult math problem? That is incredibly deep question, and a very important question as well. So do not mistake, okay, some people say, I want to climb Mount Everest. And so they look at the top of Everest and they go, why am I not just practicing here? With that, I've achieved that goal, that summit of conceptual understanding. I just want to jump to that. You can't. True understanding often involves lots and lots of practice. You want to be learning, particularly with math, not just through your declarative, but through your procedural systems. And the more you practice, for example, Richard Feynman, the brilliant physicist, he would go home and practice through your vacation. I mean, he'd do like a lot of other things because, he played the bongos and he did all this other stuff. But similarly, Einstein's mathematics co-worker, Freeman Dyson, he loved to go solve problems. Solving lots of problems helps develop that intuition that is at the heart of real and true conceptual understanding. Let's see. After almost 7 years ago, I was in Singapore. Oh, I so love Singapore. Please invite me back. Given that the rate of information is there any new advice that you would like to adapt and learn? So I tried to give as much as I could. The course on common sense teaching has a lot. That's on Coursera. That has a whole bunch of information about how to teach effectively. One of my most recent courses, so Learning How to Learn is the one on Coursera, is like the master work that has like over 3 million students. A very recent course is Learn Like a Pro on edX, and there's a book, Learn Like a Pro, and that has some of the most recent information. For Pomodoro breaks, is it okay to shift attention during those times? That is check email, and okay. So here's the problem. Every time you pull your attention out and you go look at something else, it's like pulling up a tree, because you've got all these neural connections in place, and you suddenly like leave them go, and you're doing something different. And then to get back into that same set of neural links is really can be hard to do. So the one time when it can be beneficial to go off and do something else is when you're getting stuck with things. Because when you take that break and go do something else, rip up all those neural links, go do something, when you come back and you're getting into things, you're not quite in the same place. So it can help you to overcome roadblocks in your thinking, or if you're stuck on a problem or something, that's when a good time. And I see that Melvin is back here, so
yes.
I better be quiet.
Thank you, Dr. Barbara. Thank you so much. We can see so many questions. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the questions. Unfortunately, Dr. Barbara's time is up for now. So, can we give her a virtual round of applause for all the insights that she's given us? Thank you very much to Dr. Barbara.